this is Diane from Shabby Fabrics. I'm here to show you a fun DIY project. It's a beginner project that will be fun for the upcoming patriotic holidays. Our project is a collection of small patriotic mini pillows, and you can do a lot of things with these. You can put them in a bowl or a basket. You could put them up on shelves or display them really any way you want, as a collection or even as individuals. I just love this collection of fabric. It is from Riley Blake, and it's got a lot of fun florals and prints, stripes, checks, you name it. It's fun. And we've got the collection on both sides of me here on the set, just so you can see just how bright and colorful it really is. So my plan today is I'm going to go through each of the pillows, and I'm going to start with the ones that are really the simplest, really just have the fewest steps. All technically are really simple. And then I'm only going to really sew the last couple of ones because there's a lot of repeated steps. But if you're ready, I'm ready. So let's go. All right, the first pillow I'm going to demonstrate is this cute little floral pillow. And in your kit, you're going to get all the fabrics, and it will include some fun little extras. You can see here we have a laser shape that's been pre-fused for you for this pillow. We have laser shapes in other pillows as well. You'll also get some embroidery floss for embellishing and also some buttons. So for this first pillow, we're going to be cutting the fabric out per the instructions. And it's just basically 2 squares, and I have peeled the paper off of the star, and I've already fused it on. And all the steps will be basically the same for putting the pillows together for each of these. So I would just be putting right sides together, and then I'm going to be sewing all around the perimeter at 1/4 inch and just leaving about a 3-inch gap so that I can stuff the pillow with polyfill, and then I will hand sew it closed. The second pillow that I'm going to show you is this one that just says USA on it. Again, these are laser shapes that have been pre-cut and pre-fused. And also I should have mentioned on the first one that after I fuse them, I will sew them down. And you have some choices here. I chose to just do a simple straight stitch in a coordinating thread. But if you want to get a little fancier, you could do some buttonhole stitches or any other of the embroidery stitches that you might find on your machine to enhance it. So this is what's done with a straight stitch. And again, here's my piece. And I'm just putting right sides together. And I would sew a 1/4 inch around the perimeter and leaving a gap so that I would have room to get in there and put the polyfill in and then stitch it closed. So those two are very simple, very basic. All right, so the rest of the pillows all share a common fabric, and that is a striped fabric. And we are going to be giving you in the kit, it's going to have 1/4 yard of the fabric. And you can see that with stripes, we want them to go certain ways on certain pillows. So we have the stripes going horizontal on our flag, and we have our stripes going vertical on our heart. And there's also some stripes on the back. Ooh, I'm just throwing pillows everywhere here. And there's also some stripes on the back of the pinwheel. To make sure that you get your pieces cut out correctly, we have a diagram here, and it's going to give you each of the dimensions, which pillow it's for, and showing you how to lay those pieces on the stripe so that you get your pieces cut accurately for the whole set. And then you can see there's even some extra setup. Okay, I'm going to move on now, and the next ones have a few more steps. Nothing scary. So the next one is the flag pillow. So we have several pieces that we're going to need to be putting together for the top here. And so I have a long rectangular piece that is for the bottom of my flag. And then I have another rectangular piece That'll be on one side. And then to create the stars, Jen had the best idea when we were working together on this design. She's like, let's just take this navy piece and we will use our lasers and cut out the stars. That way we can completely control where they are. It's not going to be haphazard like a piece of fabric may be. So it worked beautifully. So what you're going to receive is a piece of just a cream or off-white colored fabric, and then you're going to receive the laser cut shape. And again, you're going to peel the paper off the back. And this always takes me a minute. There we go. And you're going to lay it right over the top of that cream fabric. And you want to line them up exactly on all the edges. And I'm going to come over here to the iron. And I'm going to fuse those down. Okay, I don't want to use steam, just a hot iron. And for about maybe 5, 6, 7 seconds to make sure that that fusing is complete. Okay. Now, it's not really necessary to go in and sew around all those stars. This pillow's for decoration. It's not going to get handled a lot. So I didn't really feel like it was necessary to do any further stitching to stabilize it. So that piece is now complete. To go ahead and assemble the bottom and the top together, I would join these two together, right sides together, and sew 1/4 inch. And then when that unit is together, I would put it with my bottom piece, and that would complete the top of my flag. I would then add my backing, right sides together, and just as before, you're going to sew around the perimeter, leaving a 3-inch opening for your polyfill. Get that good and stuffed in there, and then you can hand stitch the opening closed. So a little bit of extra stitching there, but very simple. All right, so the next two are going to be a little bit more detailed, and they're super fun, and I'm going to walk you through a few more steps on those pillows. So the next one I'm going to show you is our pinwheel pillow. And, you know, when you see pinwheels and they're twirling in the breeze, you do think of Independence Day, 4th of July, those fun things. And that was kind of the inspiration for this pillow. And so we have a couple of ways to show you how to make your pinwheel square. If you're a seasoned sewer, you've probably made dozens of these over the time. But if you're new to sewing, I wanted to show you that you had a few options. So in our instructions in the pattern, it asks you to cut 2 squares of white and 2 squares of red. And then you're going to draw a line diagonally. I'll go ahead and do that for one of them, just to show you. Put that on there. And I'm going right down the middle, corner to corner. Okay, and I'm using a friction pin, so it will be removed with heat. And then you go to the sewing machine, and you're going to sew 1/4 inch to the left and 1/4 inch to the right. And these two have already been sewn. All right, so that was the line I drew. These are the 2 stitching lines for each of those. Then you would just use your ruler and rotary cutter, and right on that line that you drew with your friction pin, you would go ahead and cut those in half. And when you open them up, you've got your half square triangles. They have some little dog ears on the corner, but you'd trim those off, and you'd end up with 4 of those. Let's put this the other way. And from those 4, you would sew them together to get the pinwheel. That's option 1 for that square. I have a different method that I prefer to use when I am making half square triangles, and that's with the use of a notion called the star singles. And these are a paper template that you put on top of your fabric, and you sew right through, and you sew on the lines, sew on the dashed lines, and then you cut them apart, and you get perfect half square triangles every time. They come in different sizes, so whatever pattern size is required, you can find the size that you need. For our project, we need a half square triangle that finishes at 2 inches. So because I'm making 4 squares, this template actually will make 8. 2, 4, 6, 8. And I don't need 8, so I'm only going to use half the page. So I cut my page in half. And so that's what I have here. And I just laid it right on top of the paper, on top of the fabric. And a little tip here is you always want to put your lighter fabric on top. They are right sides together. And so I'm going to sew on the dotted lines. And when you do that, I'm going to go ahead and sew these for you and cut them apart, and then I'll show you just how perfect they turn out. So that's why I love to use these paper templates. So I'm going to go ahead over to the sewing machine and get these sewn. Now the lines, you need to be exact. And so I use a smaller stitch length, usually 1.5. And the reason for that is when the needle is going through the paper, it's going to perforate it. And that's going to allow me to tear that paper away more easily after I've done the sewing. But you can see my pinning is minimal, just off to the sides. And so I'll just follow the dashed line, and I will be able to do this in one motion. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I like to put my foot down, and I will kind of adjust it and get it in the right position, and I'll put my needle down right into the corner of one of those lines. I'm going to adjust my stool a little bit. Okay, so here we go. Right on the line. You can even use an open toe foot if you'd like, but just a 1.5 stitch length. Coming up to the corner, I use the needle down function on the machine, and I'm going to pivot. Okay, almost there. All right. On the home stretch. All right, so you notice I didn't backstitch. There really isn't any need to do that. And so my thread has been cut. All right, so I'm going to clean this up now, and I'm going to go ahead and cut on the lines that are solid. So my preference is, first of all, that I just start and I'll go all the way around the perimeter first to cut away the extra. You'll notice these lines are very thin, and the reason for that is just to improve your accuracy. Okay, so the perimeter's done. Now I'm going to do the line that separates the two halves. And then the last cuts are what cut the triangles apart. And you'll see at this step, it mimics very much what we had you do with the first method, starting with the 2 squares, drawing the line down the center, and then stitching to the left and right. But when you have those lines to follow with your sewing machine, and it just makes it so accurate. That's why I love this method the most. All right, so I have my 4 triangles now. And you'll recall in the beginning I said make sure you put the light colored fabric on top, and I want to show you why that matters. So I pulled the paper back, and then I can open up my half square triangle. I have the paper on the base, I have the white fabric, and then I have rolled the red fabric over the top. You'll see now that when I do that, I have automatically pressed to the dark side. And so that just makes that step just a little more automatic, and the fabric naturally wants to go that direction. And so it makes it easy to get that correct. So again, pull it apart. So now I have my 4 half square triangles, half squares, and I'm going to go ahead and trim away those little dog ears on the corner. Then I'm going to lay them out in the direction that they should be, and I'm going to just use my pillow as a model. So I can put this down here, point goes out, those like that, there, and that one goes down like that. So I like to lay them out so that when I do assemble them, I can make sure that I get them all in the right direction. So what I would do is I forgot to tell you, it'd be a good time to peel off the paper. That was a little bit of a surprise to me, although it shouldn't have been. You could leave it on to stitch it together. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people like to do that, but it's certainly not required. So anyway, I would go ahead and line those up, stitch them together. And I like this seam when I'm assembling, I like to press it open. And then I would put those 2 halves together and sew it completely together. And that's what would give you your pinwheel. All right, next step in this pillow would be to put on the borders. So the sizes for these are listed in the pattern. So we've got 2 shorter pieces that are going to be the sides basically, but we know a pinwheel doesn't really have a top and a bottom or a left and a right. It's the same on all sides. So I would pin those. I'm going to sew these together very quickly. Okay, 1/4 inch on those sides. Now I'm going to go ahead and change my stitch length back up. Don't need it at 1.5 any longer. I know some of you like to stitch at 2.5. I actually like to stitch at 2.0. I just like that it holds things together a little bit better for me. That's a personal preference. Okay, just trim these threads away. Press these open. All right, just going to press so that the seam allowance is away towards the border. Okay, now I'm going to take my larger fabric pieces, and I'm going to put that down on the other ends. And actually, I'm going to flip it over because I like to see my seam allowances so that I don't flip them when I'm sewing. So this is the side I prefer to stitch from. Okay, that's enough for that. Turn this one over. Put that there. Get those lined up. Alrighty, I'm going to stitch these down now. Okay, so that's starting to flip up on me there. I think I'll raise my foot and put it back into place. All right, the other side. Okay, trim that thread. All right, and so the top is finished. So I'm going to go ahead and press those again so the seam allowance is towards the border. So when I'm going to be leaving an opening, I like to remind myself of that. So I usually put a double pin just my little way, because I usually don't remember otherwise. So I've got a pin for starting and a pin for ending, and that way I know I'm going to leave that opening there in the middle. Just always done it that way. I don't even remember how I started doing that. Okay, that's plenty of pins. All right, so here's my double pin, so I'm going to start over here. Pivot on the corner. Okay, I'm coming now to the last side. Here's my double pin to remind me to leave that open. So I'm going to do a little back stitch right there and trim my threads. I like to go ahead and clip the corners to get rid of the bulk of fabric. Once I turn those, it'll make for a nice sharp corner. And then I'll trim it and go ahead and turn it inside out. I'm going to use the Clover point-to-point turner. That's going to help me get all of these edges nice and crisp, and I can kind of poke it in through the hole. And you can see that I can kind of work it so that I can get that nice corner. Show it on the other side here. Okay. And then my last corner over here. There, I'm going to give it a little bit of a press, just not a lot, just a little. And here's my pillow sewn. The next step would be to add some polyfill into our pillow. And so I'm going to do that. And how full that you feel it is really just up to you. I like them to be kind of plump, but that is personal preference. So I'm just going to push it in. And, you know, using your point turner can be useful here too, because you can then direct that into the corners so that you don't have droopy corners. And also, when you have your polyfill, if you pull it apart and tease it a little bit, it doesn't seem to be as lumpy. And so that's something I also do. So I'm going to put that inside. Again, point turner's going to direct that into the corners. Always seems to take more than you think. Pushing it down in there. Now I'm going to kind of pull a U-turn here and get those into the corners that are close. And probably one last little bit. Okay, that looks pretty adequate. All right, next would be to hand stitch that close, and I'm actually not going to take the time to do that right now because I like to take care and make sure that those stitches, you know, really don't show. So I like to kind of move slow on those, but I'm just going to pin it for now. Stitch it up later. All right, so the last step to this pillow, as you can see, is we have a button in the center, and that gives it a tufted look. And I have a little tip on that. And so this is one of the buttons that will come with your kit. And I'm going to be using a needle and thread, and I'm going to be using navy thread to match my button. And so I am not going to tuft it and assemble with the button all in one step. I'm actually going to break it up into 2 steps. I find that easier. Trying to sew the button on and pull it tight at the same time, to me, is just a little difficult. So I'm going to kind of squish it in the middle using my thumb and my middle finger, and then I will start from the back side and poke it up through very near the center. Now, I'm not going to pull the thread tight at this point. I'm just going to let it loose. And then I'll do another small stitch and go right back down, and I'm shooting to come up right near where the thread initially went in. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull my needle through. If you happen to have some polyester thread, it's quite a bit stronger than cotton, and it would do a better job. A lot of times when you want to really pull hard on your cotton thread, it would break. And we have a little stitch that shows here, but our button's going to cover that, so that will be okay. So now that I have those done, I'm going to really give that a good pull, and I'm going to go ahead and just tie a knot right now. Now, it doesn't have to be completely tight, because when I do add the button, I can tighten it up some more. But this just gives me a really good head start. And you can see I'm going to pull it a little bit more and a little bit more. And this will just give me a good head start for the tufting. All right, so I've done two knots there. And now I'm going to direct my thread to the top. And I can go ahead and add the button at this time. I'm going to make sure that that needle comes up very close to where it did before. Go ahead and pull it again, fairly snug. It's always an adventure to try and, get the buttonhole the second time when the button's already in place. A lot of times I'll poke my needle through and then thread it through the hole of the button so that, there we go. All right, I'm going to go back down again. Make sure that comes out again right near the center. Pull that through. Okay, so there's my button. And I have that long tail, and I can kind of cinch it down again, and I can pull it really tight. And that will pull it down even more. And that's just what I find the easiest way to do it. Okay, and then I can trim my threads, and we've got our tufted pillow ready to go. So that one wasn't too bad. All right, our final pillow to work on now is the heart pillow. And it has a number of things on there that we're going to show you that are just a little bit extra. All right, so when you construct the heart pillow, you can see that we have a seam on the front side. And so you're going to take the first two pieces, the stripe, which I have going vertically, and then I'm going to do a horizontal seam that's going to be right here across the middle. Okay, and then we put our right sides together. Okay, I'm going to turn this over so that I can see the front. Now, I took the pattern of the heart and I traced it onto freezer paper. We recommend that because there's a couple of advantages to doing that. The first thing is that I'm not destroying my pattern and I can use it again. Second thing is this freezer paper can aid us in sewing the heart shape onto our fabric. So I'm going to place this down here, and you can see that I want it to be maybe a third of the way down. And if I look here, I'll say, oh, that looks like maybe an inch, inch and a quarter or so. And so I'm just going to eyeball it, but I'm going to lay that on there. Now, this freezer paper has a shiny side. It's a little bit of a wax. And if I put a warm iron to that, it will temporarily adhere to my fabric. I'm going to use that to my advantage here. Place that on there, make sure I'm straight. Doesn't look quite straight yet. And then I'm just going to put the iron on there. And it's going to stay on there for me. So now instead of having to trace the heart shape onto my fabric, I'm going to go ahead and leave that there. And I am going to do my sewing. And I'm going to sew very near to the edge of the freezer paper. Now, once again, I need to leave an opening so that I can put the fiber fill inside. Leaving an opening on a heart shape, if you're in a curved area, it makes it very difficult to sew that opening shut and to make it look nice and smooth. So you want to go for the straighter area. So on the sides here, I'm going to make a mark, and that's again going to remind me to stop before the end. And it even could be a little bit bigger. I even could go a little further, but that is going to be the straightest area for me to sew. All right, so I'm going to take this over to the machine. And I do think that I'm just going to put a couple of pins out around the perimeter just to hold the fabric pieces together. Again, I've got right sides together. All right, going to start at the top near my mark. Go ahead and put my needle down right at the edge of the freezer paper. Lower my presser foot and just do a stitch right around the edge. Now I'm going to go a little slower here. I can see the edge of the paper through my presser foot. An open toe foot would have been a good idea here too. This is fine, but there are some options. Okay, I'm going to come to this inside corner, and when I get there, I'm going to stop and pivot. Okay, I'm at the end. I'll pivot again. Do a little back stitching and trim my thread. So now I can actually pull off the freezer paper. And I'm going to take my scissors and I am going to trim the excess fabric away. And it's going to be 1/4 inch from the stitching line. Now, obviously, I don't have a stitching line right here, so I'm going to imagine where that trimming line would go. All right, so now I have my heart shape. And before I turn it, I do want to put a little clip right here in this seam allowance, not cutting the thread at all, but that will allow for that to turn and be a little bit smoother. So you can see I've trimmed it, but not all the way to the seam. Okay, so now I'm ready to turn it through my opening. Get it started here. All right, so I need my point turner again. So I'm going to use the other end this time because our heart has this rounded edges. This will be perfect for pushing out those edges. See how that just makes it nice and smooth? And I can go around to the other side and do that too. And I just kind of go over it several times and kind of push it all the way out to the edge. All right, and then I have the point down at the bottom, so I'll change ends and poke that inside there too. All right, so I'm going to give that a little press. And another way of getting those out too is I kind of roll those back and forth between my fingers, and that kind of brings the seam right out to the very edge. Okay, so I can turn this edge in 1/4 inch and do it on both sides, and I can also press that under a little bit too to help me when I do my hand stitching. It's really quite the trick to be able to do this and not have a little bump or a little valley there when you are making those openings close up. Okay, so here's my heart shape. I know I have my buttons to put on, but I'm actually going to show you a little trick about these. So my next step is going to be to put the fiber fill in. Again, I'm going to tease it apart, make sure it's not lumpy, and start putting it inside there. I can kind of use my point turner. Whatever works best for you. This heart pillow is a little bit smaller, and actually I think that I could use the point turner, but I don't think I really need to on this one. But stuff kind of has a mind of its own, and it gets kind of slippery. So you kind of have to wrestle it just a little bit. Put some more in there. That might be too much. All right, we're almost there. And again, I'm not going to take the time to stitch that closed. Right now, I don't think I have that in there very smooth. I want to go in there and put some more in the corners there. Yeah, that makes a difference. Really pushing it in. to smooth out those rounded edges. Okay. Now, you'll notice in our sample that we will be putting the cording around the outside. So if you have like a little dip and you're like, oh, it's not going away, we're going to actually be covering that up. So you don't have to get too crazy about working that in. All right, I'm going to fold in those seam allowances and temporarily close it with a pin. There we go. Nope, that does not look good. Better, much better. Okay, so the buttons. This is a little trick that I learned from one of the other gals that sews here at Shabby. I thought it was genius, so I can't quite take credit for it, but I'm happy to show you. So trying to sew these on while the pillow's already constructed can be tricky. If you tried to sew them on before you did your stitching around the outside, the buttons would be in the way. So this is kind of a solution to that dilemma. How can we get those on there without too much trouble? Well, here's what I learned. I took my thread and with my button, I went ahead and I put thread through the button. And again, just like before, I'm kind of leaving a little tail. I'm not pulling the knot all the way to the top. And I'm going to go through the button 2 or 3 times. I'm going to pull it nice and snug. I think I'll go one more time. Okay, so now my button has some thread on it. I'm going to go to the back side and I'm going to knot it. Okay. Going to trim my thread. You're like, wait, we haven't sewn the button on yet. Well, we're not going to sew the button on. We're going to glue the button on. And because we put the thread on there, it's going to look like we sewed it on. That's the magic. Now, some of you may think that's cheating a little bit. I just think it's smart. So I've got my hot glue gun here. And you can see that we've got our 5 buttons. So I want 1 in the center and then 2 on each side of that. So it's kind of a, you could mark them. I'm not going to. So I'm just going to put a little dot of glue. Right on the seam line. Okay. Now, I think that it's worth saying that I have taken care to make sure that the thread and the buttonholes are all horizontal and they're going to line up right over the top of the seam. I think that's just going to give it a little bit more of a polished look and just make it look just a little nicer. So I'm going to line that up right on top. The thread is right on top of that seam, okay? And there we have our first button. Doesn't it look great? Okay, now I'm just going to kind of estimate. Looks like they're from center to center, maybe a little more than 1 inch apart. And if I look at my stripes, that can kind of help me with that too. So I'm going to go over a little bit more than 1 inch. And I will go ahead and do all my buttons. Taking care again to make sure that that thread and buttonholes are right along the seam. And with the glue, you can kind of move them around a little bit. You're not committed. Once you lay that button down, you can still slide it left or right. And that's kind of nice. Okay. So we've got the buttons where we need. Now there's lots of little glue strings and I'll probably be picking those off for several days, but that's just part of gluing. Okay, so the buttons were on and how easy was that? All right, so I'm going to take a quick little break and kind of rearrange because I want to show you this last detail on the heart pillow, and that's making the cording. And this is going to be something that you will see a lot with Shabby Fabrics in the next coming months. We are going to be doing a lot with cording, and this is actually the debut project of using the cording tool. So I'm going to get set up for that, and I'll be right back. I'm really excited to show you this new tool that we have at Shabby, and it's called the Kreinik Custom Cording Tool. It kind of looks like a little fishing rod, and what's interesting is the company that makes it also does make some fishing supplies. So the cording tool in the embroidery world and fishing reels, which is a very interesting combination. So the Kreinik tool will be used as we go through, and I'm going to show you what we have using embroidery floss. You can use any kind of twine or yarn, string. There's so many options with this, and we will be showing you more and more of those options as time continues. But we're going to be using embroidery floss today. And so we picked the colors that are perfect matches for our pillows. And I'm going to actually be making a little bit smaller version of the cording because it's a lot of floss, and I would probably have to move 4, 5, or 10 feet away to actually stretch it out like it needs to be, and I'm not going to do that today. So I'm just going to show you a smaller piece, but it's going to be the method that we'll use. So when you get your embroidery floss, go ahead and take the labels off. And when you do that and you open it up, you can see that it forms like a loop. I suggest this because you're going to be using the entire skein of the embroidery floss in the blue and the red to make a piece of cording. Now, I made a piece earlier with the whole skein of red and blue, and I just wanted to show you that this is the size that it has reduced to. With the folding and twisting and so on, it shrinks it up quite a bit. And this is not even a full yard. I think I measured this at about 26 or 27 inches. More than enough for doing the perimeter around our little pillow, but it's something that you're going to want to play with a little bit if you have a specific length in mind for a project. You need to kind of know that it shrinks down significantly. So I went ahead, and you want equal amounts of each color. And so I went ahead and I measured out 4 yards of blue and 4 yards of red. And what I've done initially is I just folded it in half so that I have 2 strands. And then I'm actually going to fold it again so that I have a total of 4 strands. And it's the full embroidery floss. I know when we're stitching, sometimes we pull the threads apart, but when I reference a strand, I mean all 6 of those threads together. So now we've got 4. Okay, so there's the folded end, and then there's the other end where I have one fold and open end. I am going to tie a knot there. Okay, just near the end, just a little overhand knot, just near the end. Okay? Now, to join the second color, I'm going to do the same thing in terms of folding it in half. And then before I fold it in half again, I'm going to actually loop it through the red floss so that when I hold them out together, you can see that they are connected in the middle. All right, so I have my red floss and my blue floss. I'm going to tie a knot in the blue just like I did the red. Okay, so this is pretty long and I'm going to have to back up to make this work, but you'll see why that needs to be. So I have a command hook stuck on the table over here, and it's just going to be a second set of hands for me. So I'm going to take one end, and I'm just going to take the knot and slip it over the hook. And I'm going to be stretching it out. And I need to go back as far as possible to keep a little bit of tension on this. And then I'm going to take my tool, and I'm going to hook it on the other end. So now I've got some tension there. Now, once this is in place like this, I can start turning, and it's twisting the cording. And I do want to keep a slight bit of tension on that, because what that's going to allow me to do is for the twist to be very uniform throughout the cord. All right, and I'm going to just keep going and keep going. You'll notice that as you continue twisting, that the floss is going to shorten up a little bit, and that's what we want. And so usually the question is, well, how do I know when I've twisted enough? So here's a little test that I do. First of all, I'm going to notice that when I'm turning that I'm going to start feeling a bit of resistance, that it's not quite as easy to turn. And so I'm feeling that now. So I'm going to stop turning, and I'm going to put the hook, and I'm going to put it between my fingers so that the thread does not pull off the hook. Now to test it, I'm going to grab it ahead, and I just want to see how much does it wind up on itself. And you can see it's winding up on itself quite a bit, but I actually want it just a little bit tighter. So I'm going to be very careful, and I do not want this to slip off the hook. So I'm being very careful there, holding it on there, and I'm going to turn a little bit more. All right, I'm going to stop again, test it again, and you can see that it's curling up a little bit quicker. Okay, now this next part takes a little practice. I'm not going to kid you here. It takes a little practice, and if you mess up the first time or two, it's fine. You can do it over again. But because I had let that twist up a little bit, I wanted to smooth out the floss a little bit because it had a couple little kinks. All right, so I'm going to go in, and I'm going to find the connection of where the red and the blue meet, and I'm going to pull that off to the left. Now I'm going to go, and with my hand still on the tool underneath the hook, I'm going to reach over, and I'm going to grab the blue end, and I'm going to pull it off, and I'm going to switch ends. Okay. That way I can have my second set of hands holding the other end, and my goal is just to have it there so that I can put the other knotted end, the blue end, on the hook. I'm keeping it taut. I am not letting it get loose. All right, so now both of them are on the hook, and I'm going to, again, with my index finger and my thumb, I'm going to go over the top of the hook, keeping it taut. Now I can go in and pull it off the hook, and this is kind of where the magic begins. I'm keeping some pressure, some tension, I guess I should say. And then I am going to let go with my right hand, and the Kreinik tool is going to act like a weight, and it's going to spin, and it's going to make our cording, and this is kind of the magic. All you really do is keep it held up in the air. Either your left hand at the top has got a firm grip, and I'm just going to let go with my right hand. And so you can see it's spinning. This is a result of all the twisting that I did, and I'm just going to let it spin. Okay, it started to go back the other direction, so that's when I grabbed it. If you'd like, you can put that end back on the hook, and if you want your cording to be a little bit tighter, you can do this by going the opposite direction with the Kreinik tool, and that winds it a little bit tighter. It doesn't always stay as tight as you want it to, and you can see that I'm going up and down, smoothing it out. I'm going to pull it, let it go, and I let it go. And now it stayed twisted. To me, it's magic. All right, it will untwist if I don't take these two open ends and create another knot. So that's what I'll do. So I'll create another knot, putting the two together, and then I take my scissors and cut off those first knots that I put in. And so that's going to give me my cording. So here's a piece of cording now that I've just shown you. I did another piece earlier that I showed you that I've got more strands. Instead of 4, this is 8 with the whole skein of blue and red. And then just as a little teaser about some things that we'll show you in upcoming segments is I used cotton yarn. And you can see this big chunky cording and how fun that is. And that is a possibility with the Kreinik tool as well. And then just for fun, I put a little tassel at the end. So that is the cording tool. And so to add the cording to our pillow, I'm just going to show a little bit of it here. If you want to hand stitch it down, go for it. I didn't want to. So I took my cording and I started down at the bottom end and I kind of put the knot back behind and I just kind of held it in place. I'm going to use the hot glue gun here and just with tiny, tiny bits of glue right on the seam line, and you can see I'm being very, very skimpy in the amounts of glue. And I've got my glue gun on the lower temperature so that I don't burn myself too much. And then I'm just going to lay the cording right on the seam. Okay. Now you'll see that I did not put a lot of glue. I maybe went 1.5 inches because that glue hardens so quickly. And because I've used the low temperature, I'm able to squeeze it and manipulate it and not burn myself. And so I would continue all the way around, again using very small amounts of glue and guiding that on there. Now, if a little bit of glue squirts out, if you'd like to kind of pull it away, you can. What I found worked for me is I kind of took the cording and rolled it towards that, and it just kind of covered it up. But you can see that looks really nice. And so I would continue all the way around, kind of do a little dip in the middle and so forth. So at the very ends, I'm going to show you what I did here. Because again, these are going to be on display. You're not really going to see the back sides. I just tucked the knots both in the back and kind of glued them in place. And so when I got around to the far edge and I saw exactly how long I needed my cording to be, I went ahead and tied another knot and cut it to length. And that's when I got here, I had those little pieces, and that's what I then glued back behind. And it worked out just fine. See, I think the end of it looks good. Again, if you want to hand stitch that on, go for it. I just felt like gluing was something I would rather do. So there you have it. You have a fun set of Patriotic Mini Pillows. And we know they'll be a fun addition to your home for Memorial Day, for 4th of July, even Flag Day. I just think anything patriotic is fun, and you can see that with this fabric line, there's going to be some other shabby projects that you could have a whole coordinated look, and I think it'd be a ton of fun. So we will see you next time on a Shabby video. Don't forget to subscribe to YouTube and to ring the bell so you get notified when a new tutorial comes online. See you next time.